Hi, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. It's the first in our series of tech investment, and today we're talking a little bit about IT solutions and the race for talent. You're with me. My name is Ashwin. I'm going to be your host today. I'm a senior technology consultant here at Monroe Consulting. And for those of you who don't know, a little bit about Monroe Consulting, we're an executive level search firm. We've been here in Southeast Asia for the past 15 years or so. So just to give you a little bit of a rundown on today's event, we've 3 esteemed panelists, along with myself as your host. First, we have Lavinder Singh, Senior Solution Architect at Experanti IoT. He's going to talk a little bit more about the fundamentals of implementation and the scaling of IoT for your business. We have the CEO of Singularity Aerotech Asia, Hafiz Hassan. Welcome, Hafiz. He's going to be talking about engaging customers effectively for IoT deployment. And last but not least, we have Avinash Kumar, our very own Managing Director. He's going to talk a little bit more about the talent side, plugging in the IT skill set and the talent gap as well. After that, we'll have a little bit of time for dedicated question and answers. That's a Q&A segment from our audience members who are right now live. Followed by closing statements and conclusion. So just to set sort of the ground rules a little bit in terms of a little bit of housekeeping as well. First off, you guys are on mute by default, so only the panelists will be speaking during the webinar. If you have any questions during the session of the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up during the question and answer session at the end of this, at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this session, hence the link will be shared, so you guys can watch it and sort of revise it after this session. Right, so just getting into it, IoT, what is it? How do we implement it, and what are some of the concerns of investors, right? We ran sort of a recent poll to kind of understand what the concerns were. A top sort of priority or top sort of concern was about security and privacy risk. Coming in second was about hiring talent. Who was sort of the right talents that we need to have in order for us to, as a business, to sort of implement it. And a close third, sorry, was about cost. And lastly was about governance and business practice. So to answer these questions, right? We have our esteemed panelists, and to kind of talk about implementation from a grassroots standpoint. So talk about implementation from a grassroots standpoint, right? We have Lavinder, who's a big believer in IoT. If you don't believe in it, then he'll make you a believer. He's helped businesses across Malaysia actually have that sort of start, and he's also helped sort of build the ecosystem around the talent perspective from the grassroots level. So he's helped faculties at universities to sort of do a little bit more on building that capability. So I'll leave the floor to you, Lavinder, and happy to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Ashwin. Let me just start by thanking Monroe Consulting Group and also Hafiz and Avinash for giving me this opportunity. Now, in terms of IoT, yes, I am a strong believer. I couldn't have done it without the team that I have today. However, there are a few things that we should consider in an IoT adventure. I'm going to call it an adventure, not a journey, not a business, because it is fundamentally an adventure. Just to start off with, as an introduction to Xperanti, I am currently working for Xperanti. We are the Sigfox operator for Malaysia. Sigfox is fundamentally an industrial IoT network that's global today in over 72 countries. In Malaysia itself, we have more than 85% population coverage, or a blanket coverage around the country already. And it makes implementation and adoption of IoT very simple. We have this term called plug and play, where customers just need a device, explain to us their objective, and they have everything already sort of automatically done for them. They don't have to worry about a lot of other things. Regardless, this is one way of starting IoT adventure. Now, what is IoT? So the question always comes up for us is, what is IoT? How do you start IoT? What are the considerations to take for IoT? Now, IoT can be summarized in 3 words: collection of data, sensors in the field, and wirelessly. IoT is basically having sensors that are in the field, sending you data wirelessly for you to collect, and then what do you do with it? What's next? The next step for IoT is basically to collect that data and use it to make decisions for predictive maintenance and also optimization. This is how you should consider how to start with IoT and what it is all about. Now, why do we need to make precision decisions, or predictive maintenance, or even optimize our operation or our businesses today? One main reason is we don't have data. Without data that's been collected, it's very difficult for us to make very precise decision or even introduce predictive maintenance. I wouldn't know if a motor or a generator is going to shut down if I don't know what's the vibration levels. Different generators, different motors, different assets will show you different data. So it's very important to collect data. In fact, one of the things that we preach to our customers is data is going to be the next biggest commodity today, in the future. And how do you start collecting data? It's IoT. That's one way of starting it. And this is the whole Industrial Revolution 4.0. And the overall picture is basically Industrial Revolution 4.0. But fundamentally, how do you embark in Industrial Revolution 4.0 is IoT. What makes IoT? DNA, your device. These are sensors that are placed in the field. It can be giving you GPS location. It could be giving you vibration. It could be giving you temperature, humidity readings, even soil quality. There are multiple types of sensors available today in the market. Network. There are so many networks today. Sigfox, of course, being one. There's Wi-Fi, LoRa, NB-IoT, Zigbee. And there are a lot of considerations that have to go in when you're choosing a network itself. Finally, it's your application. Application is always visualization, looking at the data, different reports, big data analytics. AI can be introduced once you have your application on board. So that's how you start an adventure. That's what makes builds an adventure for your IoT journey. Now, then there's the other fundamental question, which is, right, I know what's IoT, I know why I need IoT, I know what makes IoT, but how do I start IoT? And it comes down to a very simple 3 basic breakdowns that I have. And that's always what, why, and how. Now, why I keep it very simple is you have to first start some way simple and then evolve it accordingly. What is your problem statement? What's the most critical problem that you're facing that you want to fix today? It could be, multiple breakdowns in your manufacturing plant. It could even be, unable to identify where your cows are today. And there's so many major problem statements. When we speak to a lot of customers and the industry, they will have a full list of problem statements and they get very excited. But we always pull them down and said, list one major problem and three non-critical problems. Start with that, just four. Target the major problem and then work on the three non-critical problems itself. That way, it helps not just the individual, but also the entire organization of the customer to identify how the whole IoT adventure works. Why? What's your objective? What's the end goal? By knowing this, it helps you clarify and always look at the end goal itself. You might want to improve your production. It could be a farm, it could be manufacturing, it could be reducing breakdowns or operations, timeout, even receiving alerts and alarms for different other applications, for security, for HSE, health and safety purposes. Now, how? As I said earlier on, IoT comprises of three basic components: device, network, and application. That's how you start an IoT adventure. Devices, you should always consider, what do you want to monitor? Are they going to be indoors or are they going to be outdoors? Malaysian weather is quite harsh if you compare it to other countries. Why I say harsh is because we've got a lot of rain and we've got a lot of humidity. So some of the devices that we see from overseas, although it's rated very high, it might not work on a long term. This is based on experience. But we do have a lot of local device makers today who understand the environment, who understand what is required by the industry and how to make it tough. A network. Do you need a nationwide network? Do you need a private network? Do you need a global network? What about security of your network? So all of this has to be put into consideration. A private institute might want a private network. So then they have to look into private networks that are available in the market today and not just think of one network. It could be a combination of networks sometimes. It could be, using 3G, 4G, Sigfox, and also Wi-Fi. But the end goal is collecting that data. Now, once you have that data, you have your application. What do you do with the data? And this is where I think fundamentally we need to be very strong. The customer especially, they need to sometimes look at having a dedicated team to look into the reports, to come up with different reports, different analytics. It could be as simple as using Excel to just rearrange the data to begin with, and then later on engaging with big data analytics firms in order to make sense of that data. All of this is very important because of the journey that you're going to go into. And that journey is, again, first phase, collection of data. Second phase, you're analyzing the data. And the third phase is then introducing different sort of elements to help improve your businesses. It could be prediction, different prediction methods. It could be sort of alarms. It could be automation also. And IoT is just a way for you to collect data, but you have to put in all these considerations: the problem statement, the objective, and also your device, network, and application. By having all these three in place, then you can start that journey of collecting the data, analyzing it, and then finally implementing different enhancements to it, such as prediction, alarms, and automation. Now, some of the other consideration that we should have when in terms of IoT itself is, of course, maintenance. what are the maintenance involved in your device, your network, and your application? If your devices are battery operated, you need to think about using batteries and replacing batteries in, it could be as near as 2 years, it could be as far as 5 years or 6 years. The types of battery that are used, we always recommend lithium-ion batteries, but there are multiple other types of batteries involved in the industry today. Then there's security. You know, we've got customers who are concerned about people tampering with the devices in the field. So you have to think about how to secure those devices. What if it goes missing? What happens with it? Security of the network, security of the applications. All of this has to be put into place when you're starting to scale up to a bigger project. When you're starting small, you can start with basic security, but as you scale up, you need to consider security. Cost. Of course, this implementation cost, there is then on the customer side, there's a recurring cost if you're using some of the networks available today, or some customers or IoT providers that they do not sell the devices or the solution, they rent it out or they lease it out to the customers. So that all of this has to come into consideration. Do you want to own the device? Do you just want to lease the device? Do you want to own the network? Do you want to lease the network? Which brings us to the next topic, your analytics and the reports. Analytics and the reports itself. Do you want to build it by yourself? Is it something that you want to outsource? And cost, of course, a lot of people ask about cost. How much does it cost to implement an IoT project? It's very case-to-case dependent. We have to look at the problem statement first and the requirements. Finally, talent. How do you reprogram yourself? How do you reprogram your staff? Do you need an additional team in order to who are specialized in IoT, or who knows a little bit about IoT and networking in order to start the project? My advice to customers is always start engaging with IoT providers today. Learn a little bit, and then knowing the what, the why, and the how, start the project first. We always recommend nothing less than 10% of what you want to target. So if you have 10 acres, you start with at least 1 acre first, and then go on a journey, then start expanding. I think in terms of the fundamentals of implementation and how to scale, this is a very easy and simple way of looking at it for an IoT adventure itself. And I'll pass it on to Ashwin, who will continue with the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lavinder. Was really concise, very insightful. I think one of the things that I got from that session, was one of the last things that you talked about under the other considerations. I felt that it was very customer centric. It's very end user based. So from an end user's perspective, it's all to do with engaging with them. It's all to do with how we talk about the technology to them, and what are those steps that you need to take in that sort of process. That's a great way of actually segueing off into our next speaker, Hafiz, who's talking a lot about how do we engage customers effectively? How do we give them the bigger picture of what they're trying to implement through IoT? So just to give a little bit of a background into Hafiz's sort of experience, he's the CEO of Singularity Aerotech. He leads basically a team of engineers, IT professionals, and basically delivering engineering and Internet of Things and data analytics solutions. He's also a Sigfox ambassador, so for Asia. So that's definitely how he ties into Lavinder as well. Pleasure having you on the show, Hafiz.
Thank you, Ashwin.
Floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can. So the floor is yours, Hafiz.
Thank you. Would you mind moving?
Yep, sure.
So thank you to Monroe Consulting team for having me joining this webinar. Thank you, Lavender. We've been working together for almost more than 2 years now. Right? And just a little bit background of myself as well as Singularity Aerotech Asia to help your audience understand the context. So I'm not an IoT person per se. I've never been trained in IT. I'm actually trained as an aerospace engineer, and I started off my career as an aerospace engineer. So close to 20 years of experience working in the industry. And our journey into IoT is somewhat accidental, but in a way we found a good fit to our existing capabilities. So allow me to explain. So aerospace industry, when we started as Strand Aerospace Malaysia, where I was the COO, we deal a lot with data. So whenever that we do engineering work, be it design or analysis, you are inevitably will be surrounding yourselves with data. And in dealing with this data, you have to develop a certain skill set in analytics and engineering, and to be able to reduce this huge complex amount of data into something that is simple to help people make decisions. And having been the user of the secondary data that comes from other sources, and understanding the need for us to make this process a lot more accessible to other markets, not just limited to aerospace, we decided to dabble into data analytics first. And we found a few projects that we were doing on the analytics and predictive maintenance side, and we were able to deliver that. And we decided to take it a step further and look at the way that we can deal with the data acquisition process as well. And this is how I got in touch with Expranti and understand the advantage that's been afforded by Sigfox, because it takes away the complexities of having to set up your own network and dealing with the back end and the wiring and all the associated infrastructure issues that may come with the implementation of IoT. So Sigfox provides the appeal of having this plug and play system, so we can concentrate mainly on the implementation and the rollout of the data. So the journey is somewhat organic going into the IoT. And I took the step to spun off the engineering division of Strand Aerospace Malaysia, set up Singularity Aerotech Asia about 2 years ago. And we've been focusing on our effort on IoT and now making it more accessible to the masses, where we implement the technology not just exclusively for the aerospace sector, and we're actually making it available to the agriculture and logistics sector as well. So next step, please. So in the implementation side, in terms of the market reach to date, we have successfully deployed our solution to over 20 sites, mostly in Peninsular Malaysia. We are targeting to roll out our system in Sarawak soon. Our main market is mainly agriculture, but we've also been dealing with logistic as well as in-industry IoT as well for asset tracking, micro asset tracking, and all that. And to date, we have installed over 300 sensors. Today, my team actually is in Penang doing preparation work for rollout of additional 10,000 sensors on 3 sites. So that's our biggest deployment to date. And we always approach this deployment and engagement with the customers quite similar to what Lavender was explaining just now, where we do it in a phased manner. But when you engage with different industry, obviously there's a different level of readiness. You're talking to people who are used to technology like the logistic or the industry sector, their level of readiness is somewhat higher compared to the one in agriculture. And this is where you need to balance the level of engagement and the language and also the approach that you use for the different industries. In industry engagement, generally we found that the planning, the strategy, you have to spend a lot of time developing those. You get to comply with certain SOPs and spend a lot of time coming up with a project plan, engage the right stakeholders, making sure that all the things are in place before you start to roll out. So you have to do multiple POCs, tick all the right boxes and so on. But things can still go wrong. At least you have a plan to fall back on. In agriculture setting, it's somewhat different. It relies more on try and error, but in a more sort of structured way. You got to be able to run them through the full process from the data acquisition, going to data analytics and visualization, and how they were able to utilize that data to actually bring actual value to the whole process. Because they would like to see quick success. And in one of the farms that we deployed our solution in Pineapple, we were fortunate enough that the owner of the farm is quite progressive. So he's a young chap, and we're seeing a lot more that the agripreneurs nowadays are becoming younger and more tech savvy. And we were deploying a limited sort of like set of sensors to measure the soil, the soil health, the mini weather station to make sure that we understand or we keep track of the amount of rainfall that comes in every day or every week, and general humidity and general environment monitoring. And just by doing the simple set of sensors, the guy was able to implement precision level agriculture, where he can precisely monitor the level of fertilizers required, the treatment that needs to be done on the soil if it's becoming too acidic, and also to mitigate against any risk of flash flood on the farm, which is very, very, very bad for the crop. It can cause a lot of crop loss. And within one crop season, in pineapple is about 13 months, he was able to recover the cost of the investment and some. So he was actually being able to make some profit out of it because he was able to reduce the cost of fertilizer. He was able to improve the yield of his produce. And now he's rolling out to a bigger farm. So quick success like that for agriculture and all that is very important. And they don't necessarily need something that's fanciful in terms of the UI, UX and all that. They just need you to be there with them on the journey to help them to understand the use case better. So you need to have multiple engagement for them to understand and to use the technology better. So in those kind of industry, usability and the engagement at the grassroots level is very important. In one of the farms that we work in Kedah, one of the early requests that we had, we need to have this application very simple in plain Malay. And if you can make it in a northern dialect, it's even better. So we have to do that just specifically for them to improve the usability. Because if you make it very complicated, then they're not going to use it. And there goes your IoT value add. So you got to stay close to the grassroots and to understand what are the needs. And often we have to deploy our team for a few days to see how the technology is actually being used. And having a partner like Xpranti and local partners that produce reliable hardware allows us to focus more on the user experience rather than having to troubleshoot the defects, the network issues, infrastructure issues, and all these other typical teething issues when you have large-scale deployment. And when you look at this kind of deployment, sometimes people were saying that it doesn't seem that you have a plan when doing this. You're just putting sensors in place and that's it. But this is where you need a very experienced team leader that would have the overview picture, that can always take a step back and lead the team and understand that all this small proof of concept that is proven to the customers, it eventually build up to something bigger. So you can have these IoT sensors that already showing values to improve yield and reduce costs. but you can build another layer on top of it with regards to provide the overall visibility of the farm operation. And then you link it up with digital farm management, for example. And then you can link it up to go-to-market application as well. So you start building these modules on top of the basic layers of the data acquisition system, because you already have a very reliable data acquisition source in place. And that's how we sort of like narrate our journey or our venture with our clients. So we told them a big picture, but what we are telling them that we are agile enough to prioritize the different deliverables that we need to show to them. So that's one example that I have. And the other one that we have is the deployment for the latest product that we have, which is the social distancing assistant proximity sensor. These sensors actually keep track of the distance of the employees in the factories, because now you have to make sure that you enforce social distancing in crowded factories, especially to avoid new clusters or manage emergence of new clusters. And many people think that once you give the sensors to the workers, then the problems will go away. It is not. You got to follow this through with the right policy in place, the right enforcement, and the right sort of like monitoring and follow through. And this is what we experienced with one of the early users, where we sit down with them to actually develop the system and customize it for the use for that particular operation. So now they are seeing a significantly lower incidence of people coming to close contact with one another, because now they can keep track. They keep a scoreboard as well in terms of trying to gamify the whole system to make sure that the people who the top violators actually being sort of like put on the dashboard, and make sure that they improve on their compliance on the system. But you got to work hand in hand with the appropriate departments, such as the occupational safety and hazard department, IT departments, to make sure that the data is secure and so on. So engagement at different level and making sure that the users also invested in the solution is very important as early as possible. And if if companies are thinking about going into IoT, I would suggest that budget for 20% or up to 30% of your budget in the change management as well. You need to have champions on your side. You need to have a PR or marketing campaign on your side internally, even to make sure that this change in process, use of new technology is well received and well accepted. It's not just a simple matter of putting new technologies and get the technologies to use. It is a journey, and you need to have people who keeps championing this. So when I mentioned earlier about our own journey, Singularity Aerotech Asia own journey going into IoT, and our journey is somewhat an organic one. We dabble at the start, and we found there's a significant advantage of going into this industry, and ultimately it's also reflects in terms of how we groom our own talent, because 50% of my tech team actually has no background in IT. And in somewhat we made it work because the framework or the development and engagement that we had with our clients is always allow people to learn from mistakes and learning at their own pace as well. But I think the other thing that we are finding is that when we are going through this journey, the talents that is being produced by the university doesn't necessarily match what we need immediately from the skill set point of view. So you almost have to do the rounding off, you sort of like send off the rough edges of these talents. And what we're finding is that talents need to be adaptable. Like I said, 50% of my tech team, they don't have an IT background, but they do know how to engage with the customers. They need to know how to get the requirements, whether it's implicit or explicit, from the customers as well, and be open to learn new things, right? So this is not necessarily something that you can find in university syllabus, but I believe universities can can actually come up with better ways to instill this in the general way that the courses being taught as well. And this is not purely because that universities is not doing enough, but it's also because the industry itself is evolving. You're talking about a job description nowadays that are very different than what it was 5 years, 10 years ago. In the past, if you want to become a farmer, you just need to know how to use the equipment, right? The manual equipment. And nowadays, you need to know how to use the drones. You need to how to read the census data. You need how to actually do the analytics, read the graphs, and so on and so forth. So that itself present a challenge in terms of how you want to, as a company, how you want to put it in an ad in terms of the job description and expect the fresh graduate to tick all the boxes. So I think continuous engagement between industry and the university as well as the government in coming up with perhaps a digital skill framework is important. And this needs to also move at a rapid pace. And we can expect the universities in the future will have lesser time focusing on the core skills and allow a lot more micro learnings to happen for the students to pick and choose at their own pace. So we are seeing a lot of that already happening. And last but not least, what we're seeing here is an age of technology disruption and distraction. COVID-19 pandemic, I've seen that people working from home, like you can see what I'm doing here. And that itself requires a certain level of agility from employer, right? And you got to have a lot of trust in your workforce to be able to deliver the job, even though they are out of your sight. And as well as disruption, providing opportunities, it also can provide a distraction as well. Because when you look at the job advertisement today and also what people are looking for, they are quite hung up in terms of the job title being today you can see a lot of people saying about AI expert, data scientists, data engineers, and all that. But what does it mean? Or no, when you delve into, when you talk to them about these details, then they can talk about, I know how to use Python, I know how to use how to develop PHP, MySQL, all this. So they pull on all these abbreviations and acronyms. But when you ask them simple questions regards to the business value, extract the value chain and all that, how you link that with the system or the process to get that value, everything falls apart. So they are the job market now. We have talents that are quite hung up on these terms and this job description without understanding the very demand of the work. And for us, that also becomes a challenge because in the interview process, you don't necessarily can see all these things upfront. So that brings me in terms of the final thoughts on the overall journey and on the IoT deployment, as well as the challenge that we're facing on the talent side. For me, it's a journey that requires perhaps a change in attitude in terms of how you tackle problems. You have to focus on the problems and value realization, and being able to adapt and having the teachability or the ability to learn along the way to unlock those values. That is the DNA that I'll be looking at the employers as well. The rest of it, there are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of means for people to equip themselves with the right skills. So I hope that that can give a bit of insight in terms of how we've done things, challenges that we face. And I pass it over to you, Ashwin. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Hafiz. Thank you so much for that insightful understanding of the space. Just to sort of close that off, I believe the last thing that you were talking about was those challenges come from the skill sets. Those challenges come from getting the right people to understand those business cases, to engage in the right way with customers. And that comes from that goes down to a very critical challenge for implementation and deployment, from the aspect of perhaps modernizing our talent pools, upskilling and reskilling, understanding how, as an engineer, as an IT person, as a software developer, how can I, create solution, and provide sort of solutions to business cases. So to talk and to elaborate a little bit more about this, we have Avinash, who's our very own managing director. So he's going to talk a lot about plugging in the IT skills and kind of bridging that talent gap. Avinash is an engineer turned headhunter himself. So he's one of our up and coming Gen Y sort of influencers, leaders, and he's been in the market and he's been speaking to industrial manufacturing clients, but bridging that gap with sort of the IT and reskilling side of things. So pleasure to have you on with us, Avi.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Ashwin. Really pleased to share the platform with Lavinder from Experanti and Hafiz from Singularity Aerotech today. And great contents has been shared so far. And I think the final puzzle for the entire ecosystem is what both shared was the talent side. But before I get into that part itself, Ashwin, can you move to the next slide, please? So a little bit about Monroe is that we are a premium executive search firm that is present across Southeast Asia. We specialize in headhunting and recruitment services ranging from different industries, just as Ashwin mentioned, such as technology, manufacturing, and on top of that, financial services, FMCG, and healthcare as well. And we focus very much on the emerging industries and trends, which actually brought us to this topic today itself. Our other services that are also very relevant to the demands include like outplacements, RPO, and talent mapping. And as a business, we have more than 15 years of experience in the region. And in fact, as an organization, we have changed a lot in the past few years and even more in the 1 year itself, staying ahead for our clients and candidates. In fact, we are part of a much bigger organization called Empresariat, which is based in London and has a global presence as well. And if you look at the recruitment scene itself in Southeast Asia, it's actually rapidly growing these days compared to any other regions right now, and thus positioning us very well to grow with our clients as well. Now, jumping into my side of the story as well, both Lavinder and Hafiz, as I mentioned, shared the importance of talent and skills, both from an SI perspective and also from an end user perspective as well, to make deployment successful. And I would like to carry the conversation from where Hafiz left over earlier about the challenges the employers are facing, or what's actually driving the IoT skills gap right now. First, you start off with, I think it's the higher complexity demand on the skills, as Hafiz and Lavinder was mentioning. To do this, you're not just tied by the skills that you know, but traditional developers actually have some of the skills required by IoT. Complexity itself demands more, and that itself is creating the current skills gap. IoT is actually, when you look at it, as how Lavinder explains, a blend of both hardware, software, and elements that includes like cloud infrastructure, data analytics, edge device hardware, embedded software, which are actually mandatory to any business that wants to adopt IoT. Next part we look at is the miscommunication of the talent needs itself. So the skill gap is actually further widened when employees don't effectively communicate their talent needs. So business needs to be more adept at signaling the right set of skills and credentials necessary to fill these vacancies. I mean, similar to develop within AI, IoT is an example of a technology and academia intersecting, as Hafiz was mentioning, the collaboration with universities and at a broader level. It's a field that has little formal training right now or any academic program historically. And finally, is the changing labor market. Industries across the globe are constantly changing because of the technological revolution, and organizations are deploying a much more smarter ecosystem approach. And the key to success is not confined within the demand for IoT to be a part of the business, but doing it as a skill and selectively where it makes more difference itself. So that said, we will jump into the next part of it, which is the, actually, can you move to the next slides, which is the skills framework for IoT. So a recent research by LinkedIn has actually said that cloud computing, AI, and user experience design, which are all related to IoT, to be one of the top 10 most in-demand hard skills for 2021. And to understand the talent deficit better, we've actually separated them into 3 unique segments, as you can see. One is core skills, then we have analytical auxiliary skills, and lastly is the new age skills itself. Now, within core skills, we see the demand for skills such as hardware design, embedded firmware programming, platform development, and integration. This is the more the engineering side of it. And then when you move to the auxiliary skills, we have network management, cybersecurity, the infrastructure management, because things are more on the cloud and all. How do you retain the integrity of this information? And lastly, the new age skills, which is cloud computing, data analysis, business intelligence, machine learning, and UI UX itself. So let's jump to the next part of it. And how is this skills actually how is it separated or across different sectors itself? Now, by the end of 2021, I think there will be more than 3 times the number of IoT devices that are of the population of the world. I think because of the whole pandemic, things are being expedited. People need to still carry the operation remotely, and of course, IoT has become one of the key solutions together with AI. And the demand for skilled IoT engineers has never been higher, and it's definitely expected to have a sharp increase. Now, let's zoom into some of the highly sought out skills in the age of IoT within the Malaysian landscape. And I want to touch on certain verticals such as semiconductor, telco, industrial, and software, because IoT itself is not just bind to one vertical, but it's a merger of different verticals here. And when you look at it, for each of the 8 skills mentioned, we can see that semiconductor industry have a high number of embedded and hardware skills, while there's still a high availability of the new age skills in the high-tech verticals. But on the other hand, new age skills such as design and data science are actually pretty saturated, but even it's not saturated, there's still a strong availability of talents within the software side, but it's a rarity outside the other verticals. And from the deep research and engagement we have seen, we do see growth between 20 to 30% happening across the verticals. But I think when you look at this for an organization, it gives you the whole talent pipeline itself, or a talent strategy on where do you need to be focusing on to build your next IoT talent gap itself. And that itself moves to the core of the session, which is what can we do to close the talent gap right now. And Ashwin, can you move to the next slide, please? So getting IoT off the ground can be challenging for any company, given its high learning curve, long-term commitment, and also the significant investment in itself. It's not cheap yet, but especially when it comes to the sensors. But these other products, I think, with higher volume in the long run would become easily accessible. But to prepare for the demand, every business must, to prepare for that steps itself, we got to look into a few key ways how organizations themselves can actually collaborate or work with existing resources right now. And this does not limit to one vertical, but also expanding into verticals such as educational, governmental, healthcare, consumer goods, and many others as well. So the first thing, the most obvious and the most prominent thing that's happening right now is the upskilling, the reskilling part itself. So those deploying IoT solutions always talk about empowering the employees, not disempowering them, allowing your workers to do more. As Hafiz was mentioning, when you hire someone, you're also looking at the capability of the person to also contribute to other aspects of the business because it's an organism itself. And to prepare for such demand, every business must encourage and enable their people to think differently about the thing they do 40 hours a week. But their minds must be open to how they will use IoT to close the 130 hours gap between how they work and how the customers actually consumes, acts, and buys. Now, some good case practices that we've seen right now, not only locally, but across the region itself, is the creation of mandatory organization-wide training and on business intelligences and analytics, because this is one of the core part of it. But the training should not only be focused for IT and technical staffs, but rather on the users that ultimately will be using the insights to make real-time decisions and take actions, the supporting arms and all, thus making it available across the organization. There is also a multitude of off-shell solutions available that they are mostly built on open source frameworks. So this offer more flexibility and effectiveness to development teams in end-to-end completion of IoT projects. Statistically speaking, making an investment in the employees has always resulted in more loyalty and higher employee retention at the end of the day. And every company, definitely are riding on this wagon itself. Next, we look at the cultivating cross-sector collaboration. So this is a key part because IoT itself, it's not going to impact a certain sector, but in fact, impact the entire life or the entire operations of a country itself. And many countries are already creating their blueprint for the next year or for the next 5 to till 2025. So to achieve a sustained inclusive progress to close this gap, a renewed partnership definitely must be emphasized among public, private, and non-profit stakeholders. This combines the scale of resources from the government, the innovation, the agility of the business, and the passion and the social mission of the non-profit world. So we have seen recently, actually within this short period of time as well, LinkedIn, MDEC and all, making nearly 1,000 hours of free courses available for in-demand skill sets associated with IoT, and engaging with higher learning institutes to run an insight program, accelerators, workshop, hackathon is some of the steps highly encouraged. And at the end of the day, when as an organization you invest your time to foster this collaboration, not only are the organizations contributing to the pipeline of the talent, but also building a brand for itself. Jumping into the core of our expertise, which is the revisiting a recruitment and retaining plan. When you take a look at the type of people you're hiring, are they the kind of people who gets the bigger picture? Are they the kind of people who can see the value hidden in the data segments, who understands the why behind the how, and so on? You need to recruit employees who have the soft skills to shine in both environments today and tomorrow with the help of upskilling. So don't just see them as a talent that already has the full package, but with your existing upskilling plan, how can they be better? This would include hiring cross verticals as well. And it's more than just hiring for the hard skills like knowledge of IoT. You need to find people who are willing to grow, learn, and change the and of course change the changes that comes with the technology itself. You may need to make adjustments as a company, because in order to retain talents itself, that's another important part, because there's a lot of talent competition right now within the market, and I think companies are also feeling that itself. So it's important that companies create a talent strategy to also find ways how they can keep the IoT experts sustained and also interested with the projects that they are going through. And having a long-range IoT vision strategy and budget would be powerful to actually lure stronger pipeline of candidates. And lastly, itself, which is the most, which is one of the core important part, I would say, is investing into the technology itself, or the AI. I think with the help of AI, business can bridge the IoT skill gaps and resources required to make sense of the data collected and act immediately on the insights. And when you put this into perspective in the job market or in the work itself, it will require the current employees to be more spontaneous, and itself they will be put in a position that they need to make smart decisions. They need to grow as well while the company is growing. And as AI is a critical technology for IoT security, the environment itself will prompt the leaders within the organization to embrace the technology and also expedite the learning itself within the space itself. So that's from my side, and I'm going to pass the floor back to Ashley.
Awesome, thank you, Avinash. Thank you so much for that insight. So I think with our three speakers, we've come full circle, sort of giving the audience and having us understand, what that environment is like, and what are the needs, what are the challenges, and kind of understanding, what we need to do moving forward, those sort of incremental steps that we need to take. Moving into the Q&A segment, we've got a couple of live questions that have come up. Interesting ones. I think, so there's a couple of things that we spoke about, Lavinda. I think I remember talking to you about, communities, talking to you about communities of skill, and having those conversations about solutioning and stuff like that. An attendee, I think, who's interested in building a sort of IoT startup, and having those conversations with the community itself. Has asked, if someone wants to build an IT startup, or what's your advice, and how should I approach it from a skills perspective? I think this is a question for Hafiz and Lavinder as well. Perhaps Lavinder, you can go. You can take it first.
Yeah, but there are multiple ways of starting or having an IoT startup itself. Xpronti did also start as a startup. The things that you have to consider is education. We have to educate our customers what is IoT. We have to engage with our customers very closely. And of course, we have to understand their pain points also. We have to understand their businesses. For this particular individual, decide on what you want to start with. Do you want to go into device making or the application side of it, or do you want to give an overall solution? In terms of the network, of course, there are multiple networks available. You can have your hardware or the device run on different networks or just one particular network. It's fine. In terms of Sigfox, what we have is we also have a program where we encourage people to build devices and provide solutions. And then we provide them a platform to advertise it globally. Because since it's roaming free, it can be, you can move with a Sigfox device between countries. We advertise it on a global level. That way, any interested customer or Sigfox operator can then pick up the device. But that being said, of course, you have other platforms and other avenues for customers to search on and pick up IoT solutions today too. But it has to be, you have to understand the industry, not the IoT industry so much, but the industry that you're tackling. If it's going to be agriculture, like Hafiz and his team, I've been with his team to farms before. We didn't know anything about farms, but yeah, going on on the farm and looking at what they do, and then suddenly you realize, right, this is important for them, and then you understand what's the customer's pain point. Then you can focus on that industry. Transportation and logistics, same. You have to understand, you have to sort of venture into it and find a customer who's willing to share with you what are their pain points, how do they run their operations, what are they doing today, and there are a lot of interested parties. I think one of the things that we are lacking today is sort of an avenue to market our Malaysian talent and solutions to Malaysians, because everyone thinks, right, IoT, let's look overseas. But we do have a lot of local talents who are already doing it, so focus on maybe one industry or one product, and then start evolving it. Education, that's something that is very important. You have to educate the customer on how it works, why they need it, how can it help them, and things like that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So just want to continue on what Lavinder was saying. So pretty much agreed with what he said with regards to finding the right use case, finding a willing partners that can participate in the journey, because it's not going to be a straightforward thing. You're going to try something new and then it might not work the first time. You always have to try again. So a willing partner that completely vested in the overall idea of IoT to improve productivity, to improve value, and all that is important. And you got to also understand your strength. So what we did in Singularity is that we focus on our strength, which is more on the user engagement side, to understand the business case and translate that into solutioning, and work with reliable partners, willing partners to deliver the rest, because you can't do all this on your own. If you are a startup, then you're just going to be, drown in the overall cost of starting something like this, because IoT, ultimately, if you're talking about end-to-end, it can be very expensive for a startup. So you focus on your core, what you're good at, work with select partners to develop your own overall value proposition to the customer, and work on that. And you got to continuously keep the communication strong with the team. Yeah.
The next question that I have is a bit of a two-pronged question. So this comes from another attendee. How do we get existing talent up to speed or upskill outside the conventional means? I think this is a question for Avinash and Hafiz as well. I think you touched a little bit upon it earlier. And the second question to that, and how do you incentivize communities of talent to share solutions and ideas within the space? Yeah, so I think maybe Avinash can take that one first.
Right. Thank you, Ashwin. So I think when you say conventional, I think what we meant here is that I'm assuming that it's more to the certifications, academics, and probably the in-house training program itself. Yep. So I think before we address this, like I said, I think IoT is not unlike any other technology where it actually requires a creative space to grow, and you can't just rely on the existing information and content out there. We do have a good supply of talents here within Malaysia as well, and I think what we tend to do is that we got to build a community around this as well. So I think for an individual who is very much interested in this space itself, I think involvement in the surrounding communities of makers, investors, and entrepreneurs who can explore, develop, refine their ideas itself into a reality. I think that's very important for the upskilling part, apart from the existing, within the organization setting, but out there. And before you engage in the community, you got to ask questions about, how's the continuous learning is going to be within this networking events, mentorship programs. And in fact, these days, engaging a community has become more convenient. Because you're spoiled for choices, because we right now how things are more virtualized, especially webinars and exhibitions these days are being held online and all. I think talent can actually pick and choose where do you want to explore further, where do you want to get into itself. So I think that's one thing, because when you see the prospects in the space itself, the talent can get more interested in this. And I think the other part was you mentioned about the incentive itself. I mean, I personally feel, when you look at the incentive itself, I think creating the platform itself, it's sufficient. Because I completely agree with Lavinder, where he said that, we have good talents here in Malaysia, and of course we have other talents coming out from outside as well. But I think when you create that ecosystem or the platform, that gives high engagement and awareness as well. And I think more recent examples, I think I'm not sure how many people that are in this app right now, but Clubhouse. So when you look at it, it kind of joins people from different backgrounds talking on a similar context, willing to share their thoughts. And I think the incentive here, end of the day, is that thought leaders or experts, they are able to build a brand for themselves or for their business itself. And at the same time, you have a constant pipeline and people creating more awareness, because you want to get people to kind of get into this. So I think that's where I see this thing. I'll probably pass to Hafiz as well. I think Hafiz would probably be able to add on that.
So on the talent development part, what we learn is that having the basic core talents in terms of technical talents will be very useful, because it shapes the way that the talents approach certain problems. But yeah, we do, there's no hard and fast rule about this from our experience. We certainly don't have any certification in-house that we put or we put in place in terms of requirement for the talents to graduate from junior level to senior level and all that. But still, we are a fairly small organization, only 50 people. But what has worked for us is that we have a mentoring system in place where this is sort of like lesson learned from our aerospace sort of period, because in aerospace it's very important for the mentor to make sure that the mentee is well developed and they have they can have full confidence of the work that they're producing, because you're producing safety related parts. So you got to have the full trust into what work that the juniors are doing. And we spend a lot of time doing that, cultivating this culture where we spend some time, go through the work, step by step, questioning the mentee or the junior engineers or technicians, why are doing it this way. Even though it's right, we still want to know why they're doing it this way. In what kind of approach did you take? What did you learn from this? Why certain assumptions are being made? So what we like to get behind that is the thinking process. And if something actually went wrong, we actually will log it as a quality issues and do a full thorough analysis of the 5 C's sort of approach to the whole situation. Because as much as you learn from the success of delivering a project, you learn more when you fail at delivering something. So we learn a lot from this execution part, on top of the informal learning and formal learnings that we put in place as well. And we encourage our staff to take these online classes, and we allow them some hours in the day to do that at their own. In terms of the incentivization, each company will have generally its own policy, but as a startup, we like for me, is creating the general environment to allow people to see the impact of the work on the organization and how that in fact affect the environment where the organization operates in. So in our case, we are very transparent in terms of our business plan and how this business plan can translate into the business sustainability, i.e. whether this company can exist in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, what's our plan in growing the business. Because you can promise people bonuses and things like that if they don't see the business at the end of the day. So for us, we try to share that, make it visible, and make the senior people own that plan. There's high level of accountability that we put on our seniors as well. And that level of accountability and ownership, we trickle down the chain in terms of the delivery of the task. Because if you don't deliver the task or deliver the job on time, you won't be able to contribute to the revenue and the top line of the companies. And the relationship is very strong in that sense. And around that sort of like information and the clarity and transparency of the information, you can devise many types of incentives. And in our case, we have a long-term incentive system, like an ESOP system, employee share options, and we also have a project basis system, and more discrete sort of like system, bonus system as well, where we acknowledge exemplary performance on case-by-case basis. So again, for me, before you talk about incentivizing, you need to see the overall business model and the general culture of performance as well that you instill in the company.
All right. Just very quickly here, we want to get into a couple more questions. An audience member asks, what's the percentage cost of system integration in your IoT deployment experience compared to the cost of devices and the networking and the connectivity itself? I think Lavinder, you can take this one. I'm quite interested to know actually.
Well, the cost of system integration in IoT deployments. Now, in terms of system integration, I'm assuming it's SI, your dashboards and your application itself. I can't give you a solid number, but I would say roughly maybe about 30 to 40% is cost of your implementation for SIs. The dashboard itself. That's, of course, if we are going with a phased approach, which is phase one, a collection of data and visualization of it. And then you can introduce other features in phase two, which is your big data analytics, AI, reportings, other features itself. So I would have to say maybe about 30%-ish, somewhere around there. The other, the chunk of it will definitely be on your devices. the other bigger chunk will be on, if you're doing a private network, then it possibly will be a private network implementation itself.
Right. Got it. The other question was, how far ahead are developed nations in terms of IoT implementation and use case? And how soon do you see us getting there in a mature market? I think this question for Avinash and Lavinder as well.
Right. Thanks, Ashwin. So when we look at the developed nations and so on, I think it's no. I think it's no. I mean, it's no. You're not confused, or you wouldn't. It's pretty aware that in certain countries IoT definitely advanced. Probably I would scale into Southeast Asia first. When you look at Southeast Asia, I think the trend of growth is very high. Whereas in certain regions outside of Southeast Asia, of course, has hit a certain maturity. When we compare the talent availability itself, for instance, when we looked at in Southeast Asia, we saw that within IoT skills that was mentioned, we saw a huge saturation in Singapore. In fact, 2 to 3 times higher than the rest of the Southeast Asia countries. But when you look into the breakdown itself, a big portion of the talent actually comes from India and other countries itself to where there's more advance in IoT itself. And I think the bottom here was it goes back to the ability of that country to actually attract also foreign talents, because I think foreign talent does comes in and covers certain gaps, but doesn't solve the problem, of course, for the talent gap itself. So when we look at that, I think it's still a progress. Many countries are still early in the days of the deployment itself or the available opportunities in the market, which is why I think it would affect the availability of the talent itself. So which somehow results in migration of talents to a certain extent, sometimes outside of Malaysia or other countries. So that, I mean, that's how I'm looking at it right now.
Lavinder, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think IoT has been, I know IoT has been available in Malaysia for a very long time. As of recent, globally, it's been given genre IoT. Before this, we used to, engage it as embedded technology or just wireless technology itself. And that, I think giving it a genre IoT has sort of sparked everyone's interest, and now people see, the advantage of it. Previously, even more than 10 years ago in university, we were really talking about IoT and doing projects on it. We do have a lot of IoT implementation in Malaysia. That's not being exposed. If you talk to some universities and some private entities, they've been doing IoT for a very long time. I do think we are ready for it. With the amount of education and the amount of encouragement, especially from the government aspect, I think the country is ready to adopt IoT. Of course, when it comes to talent, IoT is a very creative space, like what Avinash mentioned earlier on. You need to not just understand IoT, but you need to understand, like I said, the industry or the customer that you're trying to engage with. Know their processes, know their flow, know what they do, how they do it. Then only you will have that creativity to come up with more solutions for IoT. But we are ready in Malaysia. I think compared to other Southeast Asia countries, we might be, I wouldn't say 100% on par, but we are getting there. But I think a lot of work is required to engage more with the customers and show them that, we are what we can do for the country itself. So that's probably something that we need to talk to different communities in the IoT community in Malaysia today.
Yep. Okay. There's another quite quite a good question, very, very specific from Sriram from Athelian. He asks a little bit on the security side. A few of my clients are well aware of security flaws of IoT. How do we manage these concerns and ensure that the clients are well aware of sensors, devices, and data transmissions are not vulnerable and meets the security standards of ISO? Yeah, I think Lavinder or Hafiz can take that.
Okay. Different IoT networks or different IoT solutions have got different security implementations today.
Right.
Of course, if you were to compare Wi-Fi IoT implementation compared to Sigfox, for example, the different level of security, they're different level of security. Something like Wi-Fi, you could implement certain security implementations to the network, to the devices, and even to the application. Sigfox has its own built-in security features already. You've got it from the device to the network, and then on the application part of it, we leave it to the system integrators or the customers to decide. We do have some default applications that have got basic security, but we've also got customers who've implemented blockchain for the application and to save their data. It makes it very, very secured. I think fundamentally what we are missing today is the security of the network part itself. LP1, low powered wide area network IoT technology, Sigfox, and even other LP1 technologies already have the capability of giving some sort of jamming proof and hacking proof capabilities, because the way how the technology is structured is using a very narrow band, but with that narrow band, very small frequency, it does not really conduce an environment for someone to jam or hack the network. I'm sure in the future we'll see many more security flaws. It's something that evolves, and with that we will definitely be introducing a lot of other security measures. In terms of standardization, like ISO 27001, as I said, IoT is different applications, different devices, different network. They all have their own sort of standards. Nothing global yet, but I think with multiple other introductions like 5G, NB-IoT, there will be a lot of global standards coming up soon.
Yeah, Hafiz, do you want to add on that, or was that pretty comprehensive on your end?
I think that's pretty comprehensive. It's quite industry specific and the solution specific. One thing I'd like to add when you talk about security is not just purely down to the system. You have to look at it from end to end, and that includes the user as well. And that's something that you can consider. You can put the biggest lock that you can find on the system, but if the key is left for people to find anywhere,
Great. Yep. I think we've got a little bit of time to take one last question. I think it's a little bit of a segue into the security side of things. How do we ensure it is on par with the threats arising? Do you have any certifications to sort of guarantee it? And how are we tackling these issues? I think you kind of answered that as well early on your elaboration. In terms of use case, there's an interesting question here. I think we'll have a little bit of time for that as well. From your experience, what is the biggest factor that an IoT project could fail in? And what are some of the challenges and shortcomings of IoT? Okay, maybe Hafiz, you can take that.
Okay, that's a good question. I would say that if you're trying to take on too many use cases at one time, that could be troublesome because you won't be able to focus on the experience so much. So as I mentioned earlier, you're trying to build a house, but you want to lay down the foundation first and make sure that it is strong, well received, and try to run one use case well received and then start build on top of that layer by layer, because it's a journey of not just the system but also the organization, which means that the people and the process also have to follow suit. Sometimes you can move much faster from the system implementation point of view than everybody else, and the rest will struggle to catch up if you introduce too many changes. This is why I said as well, budget for change management and prepared for the change management as well. And taking too many things at one point, for me, that tend to be one of the major contributor to the overall process. Communication plan in terms of getting the stakeholders involved as well in the process. That's very important. You need a strong champion in place. If you don't have the communication plan in place, then very difficult for the IoT system or the process to be well received by the organization throughout. Yeah, so those are the top two
Right.
issues that you can find in the deployment for me.
Right. So just to sort of summarize the whole session, I think what we've sort of learned here today, has been the most important thing for me. I feel the key takeaways actually looking at it from a very step-by-step perspective. Taking it, baby steps. Taking it from the implementation perspective, looking at some of the solutions that we can provide for customers, and then focusing a little bit more about the engagement. Supplementing that with great talent, supplementing that with great solutioning ideas, and then further taking that with upskilling and reskilling. Having those conversations within those skilled communities, and then taking it from there and then growing it. I don't think we're in a sort of hurry to kind of catch up with the more bigger boys, the more mature markets, the Americas, the Australias, etc. But I think we're taking our time and we're building it from there. There's a lot of learning that we need to do, but I think communication like this, these webinars, I really thank you guys for participating and taking the time out of your day to lend your thoughts on this topic. So thank you all, and I also thank you, the audience members, for sharing some of your questions. Being very inquisitive about the session itself. Do let us know what your feedback is after the end of the show. You can obviously rewatch the recording on YouTube, and we can also answer your questions on the YouTube comment section as well. So thank you very much, guys, for being with us, and thank you again, and see you. Adios.